unfortunately, in a position to meet in person, but hopefully we'll be doing so very soon for the spring or autumn conference next year. But in the meantime, I do hope you take the opportunity to register for conference and to attend. Through our online platform Hopin, you'll be able to take part in debates and discussions, in chats and networking, in fringe events, in the great array of training events that our party offers, but also to explore the exhibition. Now, it's not the same as an in-person exhibition, but it is a chance for you to meet some of the amazing party bodies and organisations that support the Liberal Democrats. So I do recommend that you take the time to have a look. On the policy floor, we've got some brilliant debates on building communities, on the climate emergency, on a fair and equitable tax system. And it's also your opportunity to feed into the party strategy and our party's values. There are some really interesting business motions put forward where you can have a chance to discuss the party's strategy for the future. In addition to that, the fringe events are going to be hotly attended, and I do recommend that you take the time to attend those. Now, we will be gearing up to having an in-person conference very soon, and that is something that all of us on the Federal Conference Committee are really desperately wanting to do. But in the meantime, take advantage of our online conference platform. We also have spokesperson speeches from Alistair Carmichael and Daisy Cooper. We have a speech from Joe Harris, the Lib Dem leader on the LGA. We've got a speech and presentation from Jane Dodds, our Welsh leader, and also our new Scottish leader, Alex Cole-Hamilton. So please do take the opportunity, explore our online conference, take advantage of the training events, go to the exhibition, and I'd now like to hand over to the conference team who'll give you an introduction to the Hopin platform. Thank you very much and enjoy conference.
Hello and welcome to a demonstration of Hopin platform which will host our online autumn conference. This is a test event we are showing you today, but looks very similar to what you can expect on the live days. All attendees, including speakers and exhibitors, must register themselves prior to the start of conference and click onto Get Started on their confirmation email to enter the platform. To guarantee the best experience with Hopin, you should use a computer or laptop with Chrome or Firefox and ensure that your ad blockers are turned off. Home is currently where we are and provides an overview of the event, including links to the agenda, which is updated daily to incorporate Conference Extra, and the directory. The event schedule is listed here, which includes all auditorium, fringe and training sessions. To search for a specific scheduled event, filter by segment or search for the title in the search field here. To add an item to your calendar, click on the calendar icon here and select from the three options, iCal, Google Calendar or Outlook. If the event organisers want to make an event-wide general announcement, a banner notification will be displayed in the top centre of your screen. Under Chat on the right-hand side of your screen, you can leave comments which will be publicly visible to all event attendees. You can like chat comments and add emojis and GIFs. Please ensure you abide by our Code of Conduct. A link to this can be found on the home page. The People tab lists every person who is registered for the event. Search and find an individual attendee. Click on their name and send them a private message. The red dot will appear on the bell icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen to notify you if you have a new message. You can do this at any time throughout the live dates. You can also invite up to 4 other attendees to a video call. An invitation will be generated in the chat for the recipient to accept. Once all members accept, you can join on screen. This can also be done at a set time and date if you click on Schedule a Meeting. Q&A enables anyone to ask a question. Attendees cannot answer questions, but can upvote other attendees' questions using the thumbs up button. Users can post their questions anonymously or with their name visible. Twitter shows a live feed of the LibDem conference Twitter account @LibDemConf. We encourage you to follow us for all conference updates. The auditorium is where you will access all main stage events such as keynote speakers and debates. Polls is where members can vote on motions. Members have 2 minutes to vote. Please note that the vote may take up to 30 seconds to show on your screen once it has opened, and please refresh your browser if the vote does not show. Fringe and training events. All sessions are detailed in the main schedule on the home page. You can join a fringe and training session anytime from 5 minutes prior to the start of the session and anytime during the session. Please do not ask to share your audio or video during a fringe session, as this is only for speakers. To make a speaker larger on screen, double-click on them and that speaker will become the biggest one on screen. To return to the previous view, double-click on the speaker again. The eye icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen will show the number of people currently in the session. Networking. Networking enables one-to-one video chat meetings with a randomly selected attendee for a maximum of 4 minutes. Networking is available at the times listed in the schedule. If there is an odd number of people in the networking area, you will not be matched with anyone. In this case, you should wait a few minutes and try again. Once you're in a networking session, a countdown clock will appear in the top right-hand corner of your screen, showing the remaining time. When you have 1 minute remaining, the extend button will become visible, and you can extend your chat for a further 4 minutes if both participants select this button. Exhibition. Within the exhibition, you can visit and interact with exhibitors and vendors on the times mentioned in the schedule. If you click into an exhibition booth whilst it is not live, a pre-recorded video will be available to watch at any time. You can add comments for the booth organiser in the chat tab on the right. You can live chat with each exhibitor at the times listed in the schedule, and during these times you can join on screen to engage with the booth host via a video chat function. On the right you can find more information about the booth, including a link to their website. Register your interest to receive emails from them. The Tech Help Desk is listed under the exhibition and is the first booth. This is the place to visit if you have any technical queries. You can live chat to a member of the LibDem team or type in the chat tab within the Tech Help Desk booth. The Tech Help Desk will be available at the times listed on the homepage, where you will also find a link to the troubleshooting guide. This concludes our demonstration of the Hop-In platform. We look forward to welcoming you to the Liberal Democrat Online Autumn Conference on the 17th to the 20th of September.
Chris, could you do me a favour, just tell them I'll be 2 minutes? Good afternoon, conference. Welcome to the Liberal Democrat Autumn Conference being broadcast live from London's Docklands. My name is Nick Da Costa and I'm the new chair of the Federal Conference Committee. I certainly hope you're looking forward to 4 really exciting days of brilliant policy debates and motions, of some amazing fringes and training events, and of course the exhibition. I certainly hope that you take advantage of the 4 days of programmes put together by our party. Please do find a member of the Federal Conference Committee on Hop-In if you have any questions, and also our amazing chat moderators who will make sure that they support you throughout your time with us. I certainly hope that you enjoy conference, and I'd like to hand over to the party president, Mark Pack.
Hello, I'm Mark Pack, President of the Liberal Democrats, and I would like to echo Nick's very warm welcome to everyone to our autumn conference, particularly to the huge number of people we have attending their very first Federal Party conference. 1 in 3, in fact, of members are first-timers. Welcome. A special warm welcome too to the many people not attending for the first time, but attending in a new role, having won an election earlier this year, especially to Alex Cole-Hamilton, our new leader in Scotland, to Joe Harris, our new leader on the Local Government Association, and of course to Sarah Green, our new parliamentarian. Thank you too to Howard Sykes, our outgoing leader at the LGA, and to Willie Rennie, our wonderful outgoing leader in Scotland, whose infectious enthusiasm did so much to give me and many others the campaigning bug when we first started getting involved in the party. Now, we're meeting at a troubled time for our country, for our communities, for our society. We live in a world that often magnifies the trivial and minimises the vital. Those of us who often use Twitter and other social media networks know all too well what it feels like, a kind of perpetual now. It's great to have instant connectivity, but it's at a high potential cost. That loss of context, that endless diet of fear and anger and urgency. The danger is we get lost in a sea of detail, buffeted by social media algorithms and media reporting conventions that accentuate the negative, the angry, the extreme. It's no wonder so many end up feeling disempowered and angry, and so often that it leads to people feeling isolated or takes them to extremism. But it doesn't have to be that way. There have been great examples this year of how we can break free of those shackles. Now, I know football isn't to everyone's taste, and in fact, most months of most years, I would struggle to name more than a handful of international footballers from the UK. But I think almost everyone can agree that Gareth Southgate and his young, multi-talented, multicultural England squad this summer was truly remarkable in what they achieved. But more remarkable still was the way the team as a whole, and particularly individuals like Marcus Rashford and Tyrone Mings, have challenged so successfully our government and our media. This summer, their team became a sign of hope, not just for what their future sporting achievements might bring, but also for how we can bring about change in our society. That change is not guaranteed, but it can happen, and it needs to happen with a distinctively Liberal Democrat flavour, because challenges such as coronavirus and climate change, Afghanistan and long-term social care all show how important our voice is, a liberal, internationalist voice rooted in fairness and giving opportunity to all. Successes such as Sarah's brilliant victory in Cheshire and Amersham have showed us the potential there is for us to succeed and to help our country meet those challenges. That Cheshire and Amersham by-election was a great moment. All that energy from across the country directed towards one goal, sending this awful, incompetent Conservative government packing. But to achieve that goal in the run of elections to come, we need to think big. We need to convince wavering Tories, Labour and nationalist voters that backing us isn't solely a protest, it's also a vote for something positive. The antidote to that perpetual now is a liberal future. We need to paint a picture of the society we want to build rather than merely the society we want to prevent. That's why we've got important debates on our values and our political priorities coming up at this conference. We need to combine the enthusiasm of our doorstep campaigning with the quality of our thought and debates here at conference. So over the next few days, I hope you will join me in exploring and developing that positive vision for our country. The future we want depends on it. So welcome and happy debating.
Good afternoon, conference. I'm Cara Jenkinson and I'm going to be chairing the next two sessions of conference, which are F2 and F3. We start with session F2, which is the report from Federal Conference Committee, and I'd like to draw your attention to the three questions we have on this report, which you'll find on page 15A of the updated conference agenda. And I'd like now to ask the Chair of Conference Committee, Nick DaCosta, to move the report.
Thank you very much, Cara. I'm delighted to be joining you as the new chair of the Federal Conference Committee, having recently taken over from Jeff Payne, who is no longer a member of the Federal Conference Committee, having recently been made a circuit judge. Jeff has been a member of the FCC for over 18 years, and I'm sure the entire party wants to wish him an enormous vote of thanks for the hard work and dedication he's put into conference over the many years, and we will miss him very much. With that said, the report has been submitted, and I certainly hope that everyone's had a chance to read our report. We are once again having an online conference, whilst we are desperately looking forward to having an in-person conference very near in the future due to the situation with COVID and the pandemic. Unfortunately, the difficult decision was made to host another online conference. I certainly hope that members take advantage of the online conference, of the range of events and debates that we are going to be having, of the different training and fringe events as well. I'm delighted to be the new chair of the Federal Conference Committee. In my opinion, it's probably the best job in the party, working with the best committee in the party. And we're always really excited to put together a conference programme with the amazing motions and proposals and training events that this party generates. And that's down to the members. Conference is such a vitally important part of our democratic nature of this party. And I'm delighted that we can continue supporting it and bringing it to our members. Some specific thanks I'd like to say at the start of conference, and especially to the conference office, who make all of this happen. A massive thanks to Susie, Diva, Wilma and Amy, who worked really hard behind the scenes in bringing this together and will be supporting all of us over the couple of days. A thank you to Vivid, Hannah and the team Chris Dan for putting together the technical aspects of conference as well and making it look as amazing as hopefully you all agree it does. Also a thanks to everyone else in HQ who are working really hard on delivering training events, on providing support and assistance. And of course, a massive thank you to our BSL interpreters as well, who you'll see on the screen throughout the day. I also want to pay thanks to our moderators who will be supporting everyone in the chat function throughout conference. Please do approach a member of the FCC via chat, via the networking, or in our Facebook group if you have any questions, or we can provide you any support or guidance. I hope you take advantage of the next 4 days, and with that in mind, I will go to the 3 questions that have been submitted, and if we have time, we may take some questions from the chat as well. So 3 questions have been submitted in advance. The first one from Oliver Jones-Lyons. His question number 1, which you can find on page 15A, is regarding Conference Committee getting rid of name-blind submissions. The original proposal that was made to the Conference Committee a couple of years ago was via an internal update of how we worked, and therefore it was suitable that this was done then as an internal update. So with that in mind, the vote was very tight, and the Federal Conference Committee will be keeping an eye on this over the next year to see, have we made the right decision or have we made the wrong decision, and do we need to change our minds? So this is something that the Conference Committee will be working on over the next year or so to see if this was the right decision. Sometimes we make the right ones, sometimes we make the wrong ones, and if we make the wrong ones, we want to rectify them.
Thank you very much, Nick. Could I ask Oliver Jones-Lyons if he has a supplementary question?
I do. Oh, do you want me to say it? Sorry. Given that, from a cursory look at the agenda, out of all the motion submissions taken by FCC this time, 6 are FPC submissions, 8 are involving parliamentarians, and only 5 originate from SAOs or ordinary members, will other options for tackling this challenge now be looked at with a wider consultation and/or a conference vote?
Okay, the question relates to the mix of motions and the fact that relatively few of them, according to Oliver, come from ordinary party members. We received a lot of motions from members and other party bodies. Unfortunately, this conference, we were given a very large selection of internal procedural updates from the Federal Board, and it puts us in a bit of a difficult situation as the Federal Conference Committee. We did, however, turn down a number of motions from the Federal Board. When we look at the number of motions received and those not accepted, in balance, there weren't a huge number which were from ordinary members which were turned down. Saying that,
We did have some very proactive feedback with people whose motions were turned down to see if we can help and support them in bringing the motions to a future conference through drafting advice and other work. And there are at least 2 or 3 motions where officers of the Federal Conference Committee and members are going to be working with them to see about bringing something to a future conference.
Thank you, Nick. If you could take the next question from Lawrence Cox.
So the question from Lawrence, question 2, is with regards to the process for motions being opaque. I completely understand the points being made in the question. I do think that we do need to work about how we publish motions that have been rejected and the reasons for rejection. Sometimes the reasons are down to that the motion is not very well written or that it's not been submitted in a correct manner. Now, the challenge here is we don't wish to embarrass people to say, actually, your motion wasn't very good. So I completely agree with Lawrence's question. I think we do need to do better on how we provide feedback and then how do we publish feedback across the party. With regards to rolling over motions to the next conference, we do encourage people whose motions were rejected to consider submitting it for a future conference and utilising the drafting advice as well in the future. Publishing all motions on receipt is an interesting idea. Sorry, I've taken your question slightly out of order. Is an interesting idea. The challenge here as well is with a lot of the motions, we want to work to developing drafting advice for members. We want to make sure that the motions being submitted are submitted in a way that can then be put through the motion selection process and then on the agenda. I think there is very valid reasons, very good arguments for some of the things you've mentioned in your question, and I think we'll be working as the FCC to see how we can improve the processes.
Thank you very much. Could I ask if Lawrence has a supplementary question?
It's a fairly brief supplementary. I would just like to suggest that the party's own internal members area on the website would be a good place to publish the motions and the decisions on the motions which would be rather less public than, for example, Liberal Democrat Voice, where the titles are already published.
Thank you, Lawrence. I think that's a very good idea, and I'll be working with the conference office and the policy team to see what we can do about utilising the members-only part of the website in a better way. I think that's a good suggestion.
Thank you very much, Nick. We are now going to move to a vote on whether to approve or reject the Federal Conference Committee report. You will find the voting button on the top right-hand side of your screen under polls. That vote will be being launched shortly. On mobile phones, you'll see it on the bottom right. So the poll will be released now, and you'll have 2 minutes in which to cast your vote. Thank you. So the poll has now closed, and I can announce that the results are 278 for to approve the report and 10 to reject it. So that is carried. We now move to session F3, and that is the Federal Policy Committee report. There are two questions in relation to this report, which you can find again on page 15A of the updated conference agenda. And I'd now like to ask Councillor Lucy Nzinga, who will be moving the Federal Policy report.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be moving the Federal Policy Committee report this year. As with Nick, I'm also new to a new role here in newly Vice Chair of the Federal Policy Committee, taking over from Sally Burnell. And I'd like, first of all, to give my enormous thanks to Sally for all the work that she's done chairing the Federal Policy Committee over the past year. It's been a busy year, as always, for the Federal Policy Committee. Much of the work done over the past year is visible in the rest of the conference agenda. But I do want to thank very much all of those who've been involved in our working groups over the course of this year, with particular thanks to John Shipley, Christine Cheng and Duncan Brack, who have done an incredible amount of work on the working groups for some of the motions that we have coming to conference this year. It's always an enormous amount of work that goes into preparing Federal Conference Committee policy motions, and the work of all of the volunteers who work on our policy working groups is incredibly appreciated. The policy team in HQ is a tiny team, only 2 people, and they simply couldn't do the work that they do. It is amazing that they do the work that they do, but they couldn't do it without the support of a huge team of volunteers who help with the working groups, bringing policy forwards. And I know that those working groups have done an absolutely astonishing amount this year, as so often. The danger of mentioning any single person by name is that you then miss out other people's, and there are a lot of other people who I'm missing out. Apologies to those people. Their work is also very much appreciated, but I did feel I needed to thank those individuals in particular. Federal Policy Committee is also running consultations at conference, and in particular taking forward work on universal basic income. I know that this is something that a lot of people are very interested in, and I do encourage you to go along to the consultation sessions to find out about the work we've been doing in that area. We're also very aware that the clock is ticking as we contemplate the next general election, and we've got some really big pieces of work that we're planning to do in the coming year, taking us towards preparation for our manifesto. I think I'll pause there to go to questions at this point. So if Adam, do you want me to respond to Adam's question next, and then he can ask a supplementary?
Yes, if you could please respond to the first of Adam's questions, and that one relates to attracting those who feel left behind to vote for us.
Okay, thank you. So I think that this question is appropriate for the policy committee, but also for many other areas of the party. It would take a long time to answer it in full. And part of how we appeal to people across the party is not just the work of the conference committee, but the work of many other parts of the party. And I think one of the things that comes that it's quite important to keep emphasising is that we don't win votes by policy. We win votes by the messages that we get across, by how we get them across, and by our campaigning. And our policy work is only one element of that. Thinking about the policy, though, which is clearly closely connected to the messaging and the campaigning, we are planning a policy working group this year looking at the fairer society, which will be focused to some extent on thinking about how we appeal to those left behind groups. We will be talking about, there's a lot of work that Ed is already doing standing up for carers, and Kath Pinnock's work looking at rights of renters and of leaseholders, I think is also really important in making sure that we're speaking for groups who are not always the ones who get the most attention in our national politics, and making sure that we're standing up for those groups who sometimes feel that they're left out and ignored is really important. I'll pause there and see if Adam wants to ask a supplementary on that.
Adam, if you have a supplementary, if you could please ask it now.
Yeah, so I completely agree where Lucy's come from. My concern is if we sort of base our policies around the yellow halo, understandably, that those people in the C2DE groups, particularly DE groups, will go to the extreme left or the extreme right. So there's still a residue. So how do we say to those people that we can have policies for them instead of coming across as patronising?
So I think that many of our policies are very much directed to those people. In fact, if you look at the work that was done on our last manifesto, it was more generous to some of those groups than any of the other political parties. I don't think that the problem is so much our policy. I think it's how those policies are come across. And how we do our campaigning. And part of that is about, as Adam and I are well aware, part of that is about making sure that we've got people out knocking on doors in local areas, making sure that that those groups do understand that the Liberal Democrats are standing up for them as well. We can't do all of that work from the policy committee. A lot of it is about making sure that our policies, which are already quite good in these areas, are getting out and that they're getting heard.
Thank you very much, Lucy. As we are running a little behind on the agenda, we're going to stop there and not take Adam's second question. So we'll now be moving to a vote on F3, the Federal Policy Committee report. So again, please use the polls tab on the top right of your screen, and we will be launching the vote now. Thank you. We now have the results from that vote, which are 246 to approve the report and 18 to reject it. I just want to address a point of order that was raised on the chat from Ian Donaldson, and that related to whether Suzanne Fletcher's question should have been taken. And I'd just like to point out it is the chair of the session's discretion as to whether to take the question. Unfortunately, we have run a bit short on time, and we will be providing a written answer to Suzanne Fletcher as per the standing orders. And I'd like now to thank my aide, Chris Adams, and John Ball, who's been doing the voting, and will be handing over to Nick DaCosta, who will be chairing the next session, F4, on banning conversion therapy. Thank you.
Hi, this is Cara Jenkinson, and I'm one of the vice chairs of the Liberal Democrat Federal Conference Committee. This autumn, we're really keen to encourage new voices at conference. If you've not spoken at a conference before, now might be the time to give it a go. There'll be debates across a wide range of topics, and we're keen to hear from people who may have direct experience of the issues being debated from their personal lives, or perhaps have professional expertise that they can add. The first step is to look at the conference agenda. Once you've decided on the debate that you would like to contribute to, make sure that you put in a speaker's card by 5 p.m. on the evening before the debate is due to happen. I call it a speaker's card, but actually it's now an electronic form which you can access via the conference website. You'll need to put in a bit of information about yourself, about what you'd like to say and what you'd add to the debate. You'll hear back the evening before the debate if you've been chosen to speak. The conference team will schedule a short technical check and will let you know how to join the debate. We've put together a few short tips on writing a great conference speech. Bex and Duncan are here to share them.
Everyone prepares for a conference speech slightly differently. However, the aim of this is to provide some general tips that can help you however you prepare. Firstly, some people will write out their whole speech and read it off, whereas others will read from bullet points. But regardless of which one of these you use, make sure that any facts you want to quote are accurately written down and clearly marked on your paper, underlined or highlighted if this will help you, because you want to be able to clearly and correctly quote them in your speech in order for them to give the most impact. Secondly, I always make sure I have at least one backup point, because you never know what the speaker before you was going to say. And if their whole speech is focused on one of the points you were going to make, it can be helpful to be not repeating that same point. And finally, 3 minutes isn't as long as you feel it's going to be. So don't try to fit 7 points into a 3-minute speech. You will either end up getting cut off halfway through, or you will be speaking so quickly that no one watching the debate will be able to understand the points you make. Pick the points you feel will fit best into the speech and focus on making them the best speech you can. Best of luck to all of you in your conference speeches in the future.
Hello, my name's Duncan Bragg. I've been giving speeches at conference for more years than I care to remember. I've been asked to give you some tips on speaking at conference, so here they are. First, make sure you know how much time you've got. The maximum allowed lengths for speeches are printed in the conference agenda at the end of each motion. They're normally 3 minutes, unless you're giving the opening or closing speeches on motions or amendments. That means you can calculate how many words you can fit into your speech. An average person speaks at about 150 words a minute, but you might well want to go faster than that to give your speech pace and urgency, or sometimes slower to emphasise your main points. But if you go too fast, your audience might not follow you, and if you go too slow, they might be bored. And if you run over your time, you risk being cut off by the conference chair. Either way, practice your speech in advance, record it and play it back to yourself to check whether it sounds okay and whether it fits into your time. Give a few speeches and you'll find the natural speed that works best for you. Second, write your speech out in the way you like. I write my speeches word for word, which makes it easy to time them, but it does risk making them sound a bit stilted, though I think I can usually avoid that. Many people prefer just writing down headings or brief notes or using cards rather than paper. Whatever you feel most comfortable with will work best for you. Third, be absolutely clear about what you're arguing for and what you want conference to do. If you want them to vote against the motion or for or against a particular bit of it, tell them that right at the start, explain why, and then tell them again at the end. Don't waste time introducing yourself or telling them your life story unless it's directly relevant to your argument. You're there to persuade them to vote the way you want them to, so be as clear as possible about why. Fourth, don't get worried if you get nervous in advance. Everyone does, no matter how experienced they are. Take your nervous energy and put it into your speech. Giving a speech at conference is challenging and nerve-wracking, but it teaches you to focus on what you really believe and what you really think about the motion that's being discussed, and it gives you a real adrenaline buzz. So my final tip is, enjoy yourself.
Good afternoon, conference. Good to see you again, and hopefully you're not going to get too bored of me this afternoon. We now move on to motion F4, which is ban conversion therapy. I'll come on to the speakers shortly, but just to let conference know that we have received a reference back request, which we'll be taking towards the end of the motion. I'll explain a little bit more about a reference back at that point. However, if you are desperately interested in finding out what a reference back is, then you need to have a look at page 129 of the agenda, Standing Order 11.2. I'd also like to take a quick moment to apologise to all the people standing by to speak. We did have some technical issues with the waiting rooms, but hopefully all of you are in there now and ready to go. With that in mind, could I please ask Josephine Sakura-Rose to stand by, and I now call Adrian Hirulinen-Tret from Lambeth to move the motion. Adrian.
Good afternoon, conference. Liberal Democrats fundamentally believe in the founding principles of human rights, supporting rights for all minority groups, and valuing everyone. And from our preamble to the Constitution, nobody should be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity, and that's why it's our duty to stand up for LGBTQ+ rights on the issue at hand this afternoon, namely conversion therapy. The Liberal Democrats have always led the way on protecting the rights of LGBTQ+ people, whether that be by protecting LGBTQ+ refugees and asylum seekers from deportation in 2008, extending the right for same-sex couples to marry in 2010, Science and Not Stigma blood donation rules in 2011, supporting PrEP, pre-exposures prophylaxis, in 2016, and leading discussions on mental health, suicide prevention in 2019, and we're here again to ban conversion therapy in 2021. But why ban this practice? It is simple. It is an abhorrent and harmful practice which seeks to suppress or change a sexual orientation and/or gender identity by inducing or compelling a person to do so because it is against what is considered acceptable in any given society. Reading Jane Ozanne's excellent paper submitted to the European Human Rights Law Review quite clearly demonstrates that any therapy or practice which starts out with a predetermined outcome, the key principle, is harmful, degrading, and should be banned, even when there may be perceived a clash of rights between freedom of religion and belief and the fundamental human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and non-binary people. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Joan Imende, described these practices as torture in the report to the Human Rights Council in 2016. And he said that any act which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted, and thus so includes psychological harm, is torture. The UK government committed in 2018 to ban conversion practices. But the dithering attempts, as quoted from the esteemed LGBTQ rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, have meant that more proactive campaigns and motions are needed to be laid on the table to ensure this practice is removed for our country forever. And as it so happens, the UK currently continues to slide down ILGA, Europe, which is the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association Index on LGBTQ rights, whereby in 2015, at the end of our time in government, we topped the 49 countries in the list. We are now falling out of the top 10, overtaken by Malta, Scandinavian countries like Finland and Sweden, Portugal, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, to name but a few. Even countries like Albania and Germany have already legislated against conversion practices. Therefore, in Part C of Conference Confirms, we also reconfirm our support for the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy, agreed in 2017 by all leading NHS organisations in England, Scotland and Wales. The conversion therapy has no medical or therapeutic value. And that this ban on conversion practice doesn't stop LGBTQ plus people from accessing support, counselling and discussing their sexuality in the right environment, but with professional service providers whose goal is to advise and guide individuals, not with the stated intention of persuading somebody to change. Please see lines 35 to 38 of the motion, which though doesn't list all the permitted therapies because that would overstep the motion's length, there is nothing in there that says we don't support effective counselling from the right professional service providers. In the conference calls for section, we explicitly say that there are no exemptions for any religious or faith-based organisations. That's because in 2008, the Faith and Sexuality Survey highlighted that the vast majority of organisations practising this kind of therapy were from a religious organisational background and from different various religious teachings. That may precipitate in some people's minds that we are anti-religion. That is far from true. But the lack of accountability and loopholes in previous equality legislation, especially around religious exemptions, has meant that for in our mind, any new legislation should have no get-out clauses, especially where religion is concerned. And where also in the government's 2017 survey of LGBT plus people, over 50% of the respondents highlighted that conversion therapy was carried out by faith-based organisations. However, just to clarify, for anybody's concerns, it's very simple to say this. There is a clear difference between pastoral support to individuals who are questioning their sexuality or going through life-changing decisions, and that of spiritual abuse designed to compel a person to uphold a religious doctrine. We stand in solidarity with the many religious leaders who not only know spiritual abuse when they see it, but they also know that such a harmful practice has no place in their faith organisation. As someone who personally didn't have religion thrust upon me when I was young, but I knew by the age of 7 my sexuality wasn't that of most of my fellow classmates, meant that if I uttered the language or the words "I am gay" at the age of 7, I don't believe I probably would have been believed by A, teachers, or B, family. And if I had been from a religious upbringing, I'm pretty sure conversion therapy would have been high on the list of treatments to follow. So ensuring that this practice is banned is essential. But also alongside that, the introduction of LGBTQ plus inclusive education in all schools and colleges will hopefully enable future generations never to have to go through the self-denying processes, either by hiding and pretending not to be someone, or by coercion and persuasion by others to become someone else just to fit in with society's expectations and norms. Banning conversion therapy will prevent the emotional torture of LGBTQ people. Many people have spoken and written around people's stories in this particular area, particularly Patrick Strudwick. So that's why we really want to end this barbaric practice, and so do many other religious organisations want to do so as well. And that's why banning conversion therapy will have a knock-on ramifications for generations to come, to ensure that Liberal Democrats are again at the forefront of protecting and supporting lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and non-binary people, the community that belongs in all this particular issue. So please support the motion as listed in the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Can I please ask Terence Weldon to stand by, and I now call Jasmine Josephine Sakura Rose from Lincoln, Sleaford and North Hykeham, who's speaking for the motion.
Hi,
Jasmine, can you hear us?
this isn't my first time speaking at conference, but it is my first time where I felt upset and worried about talking. Not because of you fine people, but because of the subject matter. It hits a little too close to home. I'm speaking in favour of the motion and specific lines because it's important that the voices of trans and non-binary people are heard in this, that our fears are heard that when a conversion therapy ban is brought in, we're going to be left behind. Most people don't know, but conversion therapy is a very real threat in the UK. It exists. When people think of conversion therapy, they often think of the big things, organisations that run camps that engage in isolation and doctrine, abuse and torture. And certainly that happens, but so much more of conversion therapy is done on a smaller scale. Parents who have a trans child come out can panic, reach out to transphobic organisations who advise those parents that their child isn't really trans, that it's just a social contagion, the pseudoscientific toddler of ROGD. They recommend stopping the child from talking with their friends, removing their internet access, taking away their phones, taking them out of school and homeschooling them, teaching them over and over that they are confused, wrong, deluded. They advertise and recommend counsellors and therapists willing to reinforce that message. Or in other words, the advice they give is to isolate that child, make them solely dependent on people who feed them with doctrine, ensure that the only outside contact they have are with counsellors who will reinforce that doctrine. That's conversion therapy. Such a subtle and dangerous thing. And the end result? Abuse. A child that suffers, a child that is still trans and non-binary, but now knows that they cannot trust their family or medical professionals, a child that will either grow up and will still be trans, or a child that doesn't get the chance to grow up, a child who breaks under what they are being put through, a child who takes their own life. This is very real. It is very dangerous. There's so many reasons why so many young trans and non-binary people self-harm or attempt suicide, are successful at suicide. Conversion therapy plays a part in that. Of course, this applies to all LGBTQ plus people. It's why conversion therapy must be banned. But I do ask that when it is banned, that trans and non-binary people aren't left behind. We are who we are. Like cis people, our gender identity is an innate part of us, immutable. We can't be detransed. But attempting to detrans us, that can kill us. I've already lost too many friends, including very recently. Please don't forget us. Don't leave us behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that. Could I please ask Bex Scott to stand by, and I now call Terence Weldon from Waverley to speak for the motion. Terence. Tim?
Hello.
Okay. Terence,
there are
hear us?
many arguments against conversion therapy. It is deeply damaging, but I'm not going to get into the harm that it does. You'll hear plenty from other people. What I want to do instead is just to present you with two very simple and I think compelling arguments. One, a religious one, and a legal one. I speak as an openly gay man. I'm now 70 years old, and I'm also a practicing Catholic, active in my local parish. In the past, I have for a number of years been an activist for full LGBT inclusion in church, quite a challenging position for a gay Catholic. In the process, I have dug deep into all kinds of documents from within the Catholic Church. I clearly have many disagreements with the Church on several issues of sexuality, but on this topic, there are in fact some very useful arguments from within the Church's own teaching in support of a ban. The first point I want to make is that conversion is simply not possible. That's the view of science, and it is also the view of the Catholic Church. Vatican documents themselves are very clear that orientation itself is natural, and there should not be attempts to change it. It is also the view, very notably, from some former leading advocates of the practice, men in the so-called ex-gay movement. These are people who, for religious reasons, have attempted to change their therapy by conversion therapy or other similar means in order to lead lives as heterosexual men. In fact, many of the former leaders of the ex-gay movement have since come out and said, you know what, it's not possible. I have not changed my orientation. In effect, leaders of the ex-gay movement are now ex-gay. The second important point I want to make is that the idea of therapy is completely inappropriate. Homosexuality or a same-sex orientation is not a disease. It is entirely natural. It's not pathological. It occurs entirely naturally in a small number of people right across the world in all times and places. That is the view of science. Again, it is the view of the Church. The Church also accepts not only that the orientation is natural, the Church also accepts that a same-sex orientation is not in any way sinful. I believe that labeling homosexuality either as pathological or as sinful is in fact damaging and amounts to spiritual abuse. And that then, taking those 2 points together, come to the very simple legal argument, which was first pronounced by a court in New Jersey, one of the first jurisdictions anyway to ban conversion therapy. That court found that because homosexuality cannot change and that therapy is not appropriate, it is quite simply a form of consumer fraud. In British terms, you could argue that it is in contravention of the Trade Descriptions Act. For those reasons, I firmly support this motion. Conversion therapy not only should be banned, it should already be treated as illegal. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Terence. Could I please ask Catherine Macy to stand by, and I now call Beck Scott from Ealing Borough, who is also a member of the Federal Conference Committee, to speak in favour of the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Nick. I'm not going to speak about the legal arguments. I'm not going to speak about any scientific arguments. I am purely here to give my personal experience. As I'm sure some people will view conversion therapy as something slightly historical. However, the story I'm about to tell happened under 18 months ago. When I was looking for a therapist in order to help me deal with some mental health problems, I encountered a woman who informed me, quite insistently, that the issues that I was having were due entirely to my confusion regarding my gender identity, and that if I accepted that I was not trans, and that I detransitioned or reverted back to being female, then suddenly all of my issues would go away. Now, for anyone questioning it, that is not true. That would not have happened. However, I would like to inform you of some of the knock-on effects that has had on my experience. I have not looked for another therapist since, despite the fact that it could well be a medical professional that would help me. And every other medical professional I have gone to scared. I have gone to making visible attempts to try and appear as cis straight as I can, because I went to a therapist to seek help. And what I got from them was transphobia and discrimination. And that happened from a medical professional, someone who was meant to be there to support me. And if it could happen with one, why could it not happen with another, as long as it is legal for them to advocate for this process? So I do call on all of you to support this motion, because not just the effects that conversion therapy has, that even attempted conversion therapy can have significant effects. It had for me, and this is a current issue. It is not just something that we look back and say, oh, that used to happen. This is happening now. And so please, conference, I beg you to pass this motion. Make it so that we don't have anyone else going through this, because it's terrible. It really is. It is tough to deal with, and it has long-lasting knock-on effects on everyone who is either pressured into receiving it, and God help those who actually do experience it, because it is a truly horrible experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bex. Could I please ask Chris Adams to stand by, and I now call Catherine Macy from York, who is speaking for the motion as a whole.
Let's get going. Conference. I think we can all agree that the treatment of an individual which seeks to suppress or change an aspect of that person's identity is inherently wrong and should be illegal. If I were forced to undergo therapy to try and remove my faith-based tendencies as a result of pressure from my much-loved local atheistic society, it would not only be illegal right now, thanks to freedom of religion, but also, frankly, insulting and ridiculous. My faith is a core part of my identity, and no one should have any right to try and force me to abandon it. Yet, I didn't used to have a faith. I only got to know God at university. In some senses, it was a choice I made, although I know there's a theological argument about choice and free will, etc. We won't go into that today. I didn't choose to be gay, though. I always have been. I tried not to be, honestly. I even prayed not to be. I remember being crumpled in a toilet at university, desperately wishing that I wasn't. I even got married to a woman, but I couldn't change it no matter how hard I tried. And in the end, I pushed myself to the point of suicide before I took the very difficult decision to come out and end my marriage, frankly devastating my then wife, someone who never deserved what I did to her. Yet despite knowing the psychological turmoil I was going through, my pastor at the time encouraged me into a form of conversion therapy. I have no doubt he genuinely felt it was best for me, that it was the caring thing to do, but it wasn't. I didn't take him up on the offer. A few months later, I met a pastor who was neutral on the issue. He wasn't prepared to encourage me in my journey, but he did care deeply about my well-being. He accepted me as a member of his congregation, and he cared for me, not once trying to force me down a path that he knew could harm me. Then I met an evangelical member of the clergy who went one step further. He believed the Bible was silent on the issue of gay relationships. and that as a result, he was willing to encourage me to understand myself better and accept that being both gay and a committed Christian are not mutually exclusive. You see, faith is not the problem. Even religion isn't. It's people. People do harm, or they do good. While many religious organisations do huge amounts of good for the LGBT community, too many religious people out there also do harm. Some even while meaning to do good. What my story illustrates is that while Christians can be great allies to the LGBT plus community, any ban on conversion therapy must, if it is to be successful, not have exemptions built in for religious organisations, because too many do harm while thinking they may do good. For those of us who are Christian, frankly, it is not enough to say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
I've got the bike live.
We must protect our brethren and outlaw these practices. So, conference, I would urge you to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. I'm terribly sorry. We are having some problems with our Zoom room of speakers on standby, which means we're at the moment unable to get them into the debate. So I'm terribly sorry to those of you who are waiting in the Zoom room or Skype and I'm unable to call. We are sorry for that. As mentioned earlier, we have had a request for a reference back. A reference back means that a member of conference, a member of the party, wishes to refer this motion back because they have some disagreement which they wish to be revised or reworked. As mentioned at the beginning, you can find information on a reference back on pages 129 and 130 of the agenda, which covers standing orders, and it's Standing Order 11.2, which carries on over 2 pages. What happens is I will read a up to 75 word statement that has been submitted. We will then hold a vote on whether conference wishes to have a mini debate on the reference back, i.e., the person who has submitted the reference back has the opportunity to argue their case, and someone on behalf of the motion will argue against. If the reference back is successful, we stop the debate there and then. If the reference back is not successful, then we continue with a vote on the motion. So if you vote for a mini debate, we move down that motion. If you vote against a mini debate, then we will move on to the summator of the motion. I'm going to read out the statement that has been submitted by the member, and this is: any ban on conversion therapy should closely reflect the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy, which commands widespread support from Stonewall and others. The motion is based on the memorandum, but strips out all of those elements that would protect agenda-free counsellors and medical professionals trying to provide genuinely open, exploratory help and support those who are uncertain of their orientation or identity. A reference back would allow the FPC to review and address this. That's the reference back request that has been submitted by a member of conference. We will now move on to a vote, which you'll find on the polls tab on Hopin, on whether you want to hear a mini debate on the reference back or you do not want to hear a mini debate. And I'll ask John Ball to open the voting now. Thank you very much, conference. The votes are in, and the vote is for a mini debate 155 and against the debate 216. So the reference back has not been successful, and we will now come on to M. Dean to summate on the motion.
Hello, conference. I'm not sure why I'm summating, because I don't think there are any arguments against, but I will briefly recount the arguments in favour. We had Jazz talking about some of the hidden tragedies with isolation and child abuse and very sad stories, which unfortunately sometimes end in suicide and genuine harm to LGBT plus people. Terence made some comments which were quite heartfelt to me as a fellow LGBT plus Catholic, and how many former religious supporters of conversion therapy now actually support a ban on conversion therapy. And I think it's worth restating, again from my personal experience, that actually I think mainstream Christianity and the bulk of Christian theology out there is in favour of banning conversion therapy and these horrific practices. Bex mentioned how sometimes even medical professionals fail us and didn't support her when she first sought advice. Again, the NHS and professional bodies have been leading on this for some time now, and we should give them some fair credit to that. However, we do think that a criminal ban would go further in making sure that those processes are completely eradicated. I was sorry not to hear Catherine's comments. I know she has good things to say about this, but we can catch up later. Chris Adams mentioned how he was actually encouraged by a pastor to seek conversion therapy, and how even sometimes otherwise well-meaning people are, one may say, tempted to offer conversion therapy in a religious context. The reason I should say that this motion calls out religious conversion therapy quite blatantly is because roughly half of conversion therapy, if statistics are to be believed, happens in religious spaces. So, you know, if we don't ban that, then we simply don't ban conversion therapy. You know, I'm a Christian, I'm a trained minister, I'm a trained exorcist even. This motion is not trying to ban prayer, it's not trying to ban exorcism, it's just trying to ban those religious elements which may hurt LGBT plus people. Something I believe even people like Thomas Becket would agree with. We wouldn't have an exemption for torture any more than we have an exemption for terrorism or for sexual abuse. So why should we have a religious exemption for conversion therapy? I don't think I have much else to say on that. Please support this motion, and I commend it to conference.
I do want to apologise to the speakers who are standing by, who we were unable to call. There have been some technical issues with our Zoom room. Luckily, we have a bit of a gap next for a speech, so that will give us an opportunity to get those fixed for the sessions this afternoon. So my heartfelt apologies to all of those speakers that we have not been able to call. With that in mind, I would like to move to the vote on the motion. Whether you would wish to vote for or against the motion, you can find the vote in the polls tab, which is on the right-hand side of your screen on a laptop or iPad or tablet. There are other tablets available, or in the bottom right-hand corner of your mobile phone. So the voting will now open, and the voting is open. Please vote away. Thank you very much for that conference. The voting has now closed and I can announce the results. For the motion, 386. Against the motion, 44. So the motion has clearly carried. Once again, I want to apologise to all those speakers who I was not able to call. We have had some technical issues, which meant that we've got some speakers who are stuck in our waiting room to be called. So I'm terribly sorry for that. I've been assured over my little earpiece thing that that will be fixed. I certainly hope you're enjoying the new voting bar chart graphics. It wouldn't be the Liberal Democrats without some bar charts that will be featuring throughout conference. And with that, we'll be having a very, very short break before moving on to the next item. I'd like to thank my aides, John Bridges and John Ball, and I'll see you later.
We now move to a speech from Alistair Carmichael MP, who is the party spokesman for Home Affairs and Political and Constitutional Reform.
Beautiful, isn't it? On a day like today, with sun in the sky, hardly a breath of wind, you can see why people flock every year to the beaches around our coastline. They're places of fun, enjoyment, pleasure. As an islander, actually the sea defines an awful lot about you. Conservatives and nationalists will tell you that the sea is something that sets us apart. It divides us from other countries. They speak about us being an island nation. As an islander, and as a liberal, I've always seen it differently. I've always seen the sea as something that joins us to other peoples. You know, years ago, I can remember a moment where I was sitting on a pier with my children in a car waiting to get on a ferry. It was a very different day from what you see today. The wind was blowing a gale, the waves were coming onto the harbour, and I remember the fear and anxiety that I felt about taking my children onto a modern purpose-built ferry which was going to be guided by a master who was properly qualified and who wasn't going to take any risks with our safety. So then you stop and you think for a second. How desperate do you have to be to entrust the safety of your children to somebody you've never met, somebody you've had to pay a fee to? Not to take them in a modern purpose-built ferry, but in an open inflatable boat across a busy shipping line like the Channel or some other stretch of water. Imagine where that desperation started. We saw it this year with people trying to climb on board planes in the airport in Kabul. And you know, for hundreds of thousands of people, it is the desperation of that journey that leads them to take these risks. That is the reality of the journey that brings so many people to our shores.
I don't know if that reality is just not understood here in the Home Office. I don't know if the Home Secretary just lacks the empathy or the imagination to put herself in the place of these desperate people who take these risks to reach our shores. But I do know this. Her response to this emerging crisis shames our country. Her response to people fleeing from war, persecution and torture is to send boats out to the middle of the English Channel to force them back towards France, as if she's playing some giant life-size game of whack-a-mole. Except it's no game. This summer, we saw Tory MPs queuing up to criticise the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, for doing what they exist to do, saving lives at sea. In their world, we're all divided. We're all either sheep or goats, the deserving or the undeserving poor. Our party rejects their division, but understand this. If they persist in pursuing a politics of poison and division, then the Liberal Democrats will always be on the side of the weak, the dispossessed and the desperate. That's why I feel it is both a privilege and a responsibility to lead the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs team in Parliament. Week in, week out, working with colleagues in the House of Lords and the party across the country. Brian Padden, Sally Hamway, Sarah Ludford, Jonathan Marks and Martin Thomas in the House of Lords. Adrian Verleinen Trent, Isabel Parasram from outside Parliament. People like the formidable Suzanne Fletcher, who for so long played such an important role in this party with Liberal Democrats for Seekers of Sanctuary. And of course, my own team in the Commons, Will Deans and Richard Wood, and our indefatigable Home Affairs advisor, Jonathan Jones. A phenomenal team who fight for liberal values day in and day out at the heart of our nation's politics. The Conservatives may win the votes, but they rarely win the arguments. Priti Patel and Boris Johnson want us to believe that everyone is as cruel and selfish as they are, but they're wrong. The United Kingdom has a long and proud history of helping people fleeing for their lives, and they are on the wrong side of it. They refuse to provide safe and legal routes for refugees to come here, while introducing a nationality and borders bill that denies asylum to those who do not come here legally. Orwell himself could not improve on that one. Stopping those dangerous channel crossings requires practical alternatives.
resettlement programmes, family reunion routes, and a new idea whose idea has surely come. Humanitarian visas that people can apply for from abroad before coming to the UK safely to apply for refugee status. Instead, Priti Patel presides over a Home Office that brainstorms ideas about fantasy islands to process the claims of refugees and asylum seekers, building floating walls in the sea, or giant wave machines to blow refugees away from our coastline. I really wish I was making this stuff up, but I'm not. At the same time, her immigration rules deprive British business of the workforce that they need to rebuild our economy. The lorry drivers to supply our shops and supermarkets, the workers for our care homes and our hospitality industry. If only they'd done a bit of brainstorming on these issues, they may have understood the foolishness of introducing a new immigration system in the middle of a global pandemic. At the very least, they must start listening to business now. Expand the youth mobility scheme to EU citizens and scrap the arbitrary salary threshold that dismisses key workers as unskilled. Allow employers to recruit the workers they need to get us out of this crisis. The law is always an imperfect reflection of the values we wish to see in our society, but the way that we treat the most vulnerable amongst us speaks volumes about who we are as a country. So too does the way that we respond to crises within our borders. When the pandemic hit, Liberal Democrats recognised the need for exceptional change in order to protect others, in spite of our concerns about civil liberties. We are a Liberal party, not a libertarian one. We recognise that there must be a balance between our own rights and the potential harm to others. That balance, however, has increasingly been tilted out of recognition by a government that does not care for the rule of law and the rights of individuals, unless, of course, it's the rights of the individuals at the top of that government. One nameless Number 10 advisor described Boris Johnson as a Stalinist libertarian, someone who only wants freedom for himself. When the Coronavirus Act first passed, we supported it. It was the right and responsible thing to do. Nobody knew how the pandemic was going to play out, and we knew that the government had to be ready for any eventuality. When it came to be renewed, however, we were the first to stand for its repeal, because by that time it had become apparent that the powers in the Act were disproportionate to the need. Worse still, they were ill-considered and confusing. Since its introduction, the Crown Prosecution Service figures show that there have been no fewer than 292 cases brought under the Act, and not a single one of them has been brought correctly. The overwhelming majority of the provisions have never been used, and the few that have been used, things like fast-track registration for medical professionals, are no longer needed. But still, the government insists on keeping it. Why? Well, it seems that's just what governments do. When the citizens allow governments to take more control over their lives, then governments are always slow to give it back. It's why there will always be a need for a Liberal party in British politics. A party that will not be afraid to question authority, and which, in that contest between the citizen and the state, will always stand on the side of the citizen. Strip away everything else that this party does and stands for, and that is what you find at our core. A Liberal party, prepared to defend the rights and freedoms of the individual. That's why when Boris Johnson and his colleagues came forward with the idea of vaccine ID cards for people to get into nightclubs and big events, we knew that this was an idea that had to be interrogated and contested. It soon became apparent that this was a gimmick that would only make things worse. It risked creating a false sense of security. We know that even amongst the fully vaccinated, 40% can still acquire and hence transmit the Delta variant of the virus. There are no quick fixes when it comes to tackling COVID. Vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. And for those who are infected, test, trace and isolate. Get the basics right and give up on the quest for a quick fix or a silver bullet. The very idea of COVID ID cards opened the door to a major redefinition of the relationship between the citizen and the state. Never before in peacetime have we allowed the government to tell us where we can go, with whom, and what to do in this way. That was why we had to take the fight to the government. We did, and we won. There was no massive army of parliamentarians wanting to take on the case. There never is. It took months of us trying to get the issue onto the floor of the House of Commons, but eventually we did. The Speaker allowed us time to raise it, and the first brick was out the dam. 5 days later, the whole scheme was swept away. It wasn't done by any great whiz-bang campaign technique or social media strategy. The COVID ID card scheme was defeated by Liberal Democrat MPs advancing liberal arguments in opposition to a Conservative government defined by their own arrogance and sense of entitlement. A government led by a Prime Minister who considers himself to be above the rule of law, a government that rules for the benefit of the elite. And whatever challenges present themselves in the weeks and months to come, we shall continue to take the fight to this government. We will offer them an opposition rooted in liberal values and liberal principles, an opposition that seeks to protect the rights and freedoms of the individual, an opposition that is respectful to others, but which is never afraid to disagree with them and to stand up for what we believe in, an opposition that has at its heart the creation of a fair, free and open society. A society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality and community, and in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. That's still what this party is about. And as long as we do not lose sight of that, then we need never fear for our future. Stick to our values, stick to our vision, and great things can be possible. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Conference. We're moving to F6, policy motion on boosting small businesses and jobs in the post-pandemic economy. I'm Chris Mains and I'm chairing this session. Can I ask Councillor Paula Widdowson to stand by, and I call Sarah Olney, Member of Parliament for Richmond Park, to move the motion. Sarah, of course, is our spokesperson for business and trade.
Thank you very much, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be here speaking to you all from Richmond Park this afternoon. I'm here to move the motion F6, support for small businesses. We've become accustomed, and rightly so, to applauding the work of our frontline public sector workers during the pandemic. And they deserve every ounce of plaudits that they receive, and the country owes them a huge debt. But we mustn't overlook the equally important role that our businesses have also played, especially in the provision and distribution of critical supplies. Retail workers in the food sector in particular have worked tremendously hard in extremely difficult circumstances to make sure that food was available to all during the lockdown. Unfortunately, for many retail and hospitality businesses in particular, rather than the country owing them a debt, many business owners find that needing bounce back loans to tide them over, they are coming out of the pandemic owing the banks a large amount of money. Even with the opening up of the economy, the debt interest payments, deferred rates and VAT payments, and continued uncertainty over possible further lockdowns are making conditions very difficult for previously thriving businesses. And it's our small and medium enterprises without large reserves to draw on, or friends in the Tory party who can hand them lucrative PPE contracts who are bearing the brunt. And as conference will know, it is not just the pandemic that is making life difficult for business. According to recent figures released by the Food and Drink Federation, exports of food and drink to the EU fell by more than 27% in the first half of 2021 compared to the same period in 2019. Brexit is adding barriers to trade for businesses across our economy, just as Liberal Democrats always said it would. Being outside the single market and customs union will continue to stifle growth, leading to lost jobs and livelihoods. But the strength of our business community is its ability to innovate and to spot opportunities. This period of uncertainty is also a period of renewal, and we must ensure that our businesses are well placed both to grow and to create jobs and opportunities, but also to develop the goods and services we need to meet the coming challenges. We need to support our entrepreneurs to give them the confidence to step forward and to contribute their skills and talents to our wider economy. The self-employed have been badly treated throughout the pandemic and before, and we urgently need to support those who have not been able to earn a living during the lockdown. These are the people who will develop the industries of the future, and we need them now more than ever before. We need to support our town centre businesses as we recognise more than ever before the value that they bring to our communities. We must continue to support retail and hospitality, not just as the mainstays of our high streets, but as the providers of local flexible pathways into employment. We need to develop our green industries, to innovate and expand our use of green technologies, and to train the coming generation in the skills they will need to gain good jobs in this sector. We need an industrial strategy that puts net zero at its heart and pushes business everywhere to decarbonise. Conference, we need the closest possible alignment between the UK and the EU so that our growing businesses can have frictionless access to European markets. The innovative solutions we build here in Britain can have immediate impact on climate change across the world. We don't have time to wait for a series of free trade agreements. I hope that Conference will vote for this motion to affirm the Liberal Democrats' commitment to supporting businesses, entrepreneurs and communities everywhere as we face the challenges of the post-pandemic world. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Sarah. There is one amendment to this motion which will be moved on behalf of ALDC. Can I ask Quinton Croft to stand by, and I call Councillor Paula Widowson from York to move the amendment.
Apologies for that, I couldn't find the unmute button. Apologies, Conference. Having introduced the exact business support scheme that is referred to in this amendment, I am proposing the ALDC amendment and speaking on how we have saved hundreds of businesses in York. The amendment is, Conference recognises the crucial role local government can play in supporting businesses in their area during the pandemic and helping them rebuild, such as the 294 businesses saved from closure in the City of York with our microgrant scheme. Conference calls on central government to ensure local councils have a leading role in local enterprise partnerships as part of their work in supporting local economies. Do I now continue with the speech, Chair, or do I wait for the rest of the debate?
No, if you could continue your speech, and Bridget Smith will be summating on behalf of ALDC.
Many thanks. As I said, I'm delighted to speak at conference for the first time proposing this amendment and speak briefly on our work to support local businesses here in York. Throughout the COVID pandemic, the City of York has had a clear focus on working closely with the business community, supporting small and micro businesses and promoting our unique approach to economic development. We call it the York Way. At the beginning of the pandemic, we committed 1.14 million of discretionary funding, recognising small, micro and one-person businesses, including the many self-employed people ineligible for government support, as a foundation for our economy within York. The immediate support that these micro-business grants were able to provide was critical to the 1,114 local businesses who received this support within 4 days of asking for it. Having commissioned an independent evaluation on the impact of this grant, we received feedback ranging from the practical uses of the money, such as digitalisation, diversification and purchase of new equipment, to very personal accounts of the impact that this support had on the staff and owners of these small businesses, saving their livelihoods at a time when central government had all but forgotten them. It is estimated that the council's funding prevented nearly 300 York businesses from ceasing to trade permanently, and more than 500 families and employees from falling into personal and financial hardship. Whilst there is no doubt that numerous ongoing challenges remain for businesses, it is clear that this scheme has had a significant impact on business confidence and resilience, and provided a lifeline to many at a critical time, as well as inspired the government's own programme of additional restrictions grant. Working with our local business networks, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, Institute of Directors, Indy York and York Business Improvement District has been at the heart of our approach over the last year. Local councils have a crucial role to play in strengthening business collaboration and support to develop an inclusive local recovery, putting small local businesses first in what remains a challenging time. Going forward, we must be clear that it is local government and Lib Dem-led councils such as York who are instrumental in securing the longevity and success of our economy and supporting small and independent businesses, which are the backbone of our economy. It is councils leading the way in delivering for residents with ambitious and progressive thinking. All of this despite decades of underfunding and outdated and counterproductive national policies. It comes down to the Lib Dems in local government to make a real, tangible change for our communities. I hope the conference will agree that we must highlight this important work and continue to do all we can to advocate the importance of sustainable funding for local government and its role in shaping our economy. I urge you to vote to support this amendment. Many thanks.
Thank you, Paula, and a very good first-time speech to conference. Can I ask Imogen Shepherd-Dubay to stand by, and I call Quinton Croft from Tower Hamlets, who wishes to speak against the motion.
Good afternoon. I want to talk about the two major proposals of the motion. These are to extend the whole furlough scheme and to provide financial support to businesses that lost revenue because of pandemic restrictions. A brief aside, lost revenue due to specific causes is very hard to measure, and schemes we've already got in place have seen massive levels of fraud. But anyway, the furlough scheme is already forecast to cost £66 billion, about £14 billion a month. The Liberal Democrats care about fiscal responsibility. As the motion notes, we're committed to a long-term economic strategy and a greener, balanced economy. We're not just a protest party looking for the next fashionable cause. How does locking in the old system, preventing change, ensure this? If we want a retooled green economy, we should not support zombie jobs, but rescue people from them. The nature of business is to take risks and earn profit. Limited liability companies were invented here in Britain to help this. People can pursue business without being personally liable for losses. This works well. It's the foundation of our market economy. The market's a thriving, dynamic place, and dynamism is a good thing. Handouts to businesses undermine this basic feature of our economy. We campaign against them elsewhere. We learned from the 2008 financial crash not to privatise profits and nationalise losses. This is intrinsically unjust. Why should taxpayers pay for hoped-for profits? No one has a right to profit. The coronavirus restrictions affected everyone. The elderly lost the last couple of years, barred from seeing families, lost and alone. Children lost their education. Some adults have lost their jobs already. Others have only lost 18 months of socialising and leisure time, which is what most of us live for. Should we all reimburse everyone? We already have a benefits policy, a genuinely radical, sensible and far-sighted one. A UBI will protect everyone from poverty fairly and with no favourites or discrimination. We are a party that cares. That's why this motion is so tempting. But we're also a party of sense and principle. Direct financial support for one group of people claiming our attention is picking favourites. Every time we pick favourites, if we care about justice, we should think about the others who haven't claimed our attention right now. We have all suffered. We already have policies to support the poor and help lifelong education and reskilling. We should be pushing the prescient ideas we've already had. We don't need special treatment for those who shout loudest at great cost to us all and our futures. These billions could be so much better spent to achieve our goals. Vote against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinton. That's another first-time speech to conference. Can I ask Hina Bakari to stand by? And I call Imogen Shepherd-Dubey, who's a councillor in Wokingham.
Good afternoon, conference. I hope you're all enjoying this virtual conference that we're doing this year and having a good evening. Over the last 18 months, we're very clearly seeing differences in our high street and offices. During the pandemic, more people have taken up shopping online. More people are working from home rather than commuting to an office or a place of work. This is better for the environment, but we clearly need to rethink different business models and different working conditions for everyone. We need to retrain people to do new jobs and maybe very different jobs from what they did before. This could involve improving IT skills, but we all know we don't have enough lorry drivers and care workers, as mentioned. The answer is very clear. We need to retrain people and make these jobs more appealing. But I don't see our current government doing anything to tackle this shortage. We also need to look at business rates, as taxation should not be about the size of the office or retail space you occupy. One thing that did become clear in lockdown, that there was many successful businesses that have little or no premises at all. This puts more traditional businesses at a disadvantage, and taxation needs to be updated and really should be based on profitability alone. Many of our restaurants, bars and hotels have been hit badly in this pandemic, and they're struggling to recover. Labour shortages are blighting these business growths. Many of these positions were filled by young European nationals who are just not coming to work here anymore because of both the pandemic and Brexit. Hospitality needs our government to keep the reduced VAT rates. Many companies are also reporting that banks are currently reluctant to provide business loans. This means a lot of businesses cannot expand as quickly as they would like to. In order to facilitate recovery, the government needs to provide backing and support so that banks can confidently give loans to these businesses that are trying to recover. Our small businesses need these cash injections to keep jobs and growing. It is better to support them now than face mass unemployment. So when is our government going to step up and wake up? Conference, please support this motion with or without the amendment, but as a local councillor, I would support what Paula said as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Imogen. Can I ask Ian Solemn to stand by? And I call Councillor Hina Bakari. Hina is a councillor in Merton. She was also elected to the London Assembly last May, where she's hit the road running and is already Vice Chair of the Assembly's Economy Committee.
Thank you, Chris. It gives me so much pleasure to make my first federal conference speech to you as a Liberal Democrat London Assembly member. Thank you to every single Liberal Democrat who helped us to double our Assembly representation in May. Since being elected, jobs and small businesses have been at the heart of my work. I am privileged to be the Vice Chair of the London Assembly Committee and have worked hard to be a voice for those who have been the least heard and the most affected during the pandemic. Younger people, older people, those who are disabled, and those from ethnic minority communities. There is an easy misconception that London is wealthy and that our businesses are all big corporates. But small businesses are the engines of our economy. Small businesses have been suffering. We have the highest rate of child poverty in this country because of high housing and childcare costs. Our tourism, hospitality, creative industries have been hard hit by COVID-19, and Brexit is a disaster for our financial services. There is so much in this motion to support, as it will directly help those Londoners who I know are struggling right now. Like the businesses I have met this summer, from the sandwich shops in the city to the nightclubs in the West End, small businesses doing their very best to cope with the mountains of debt, staff shortages, COVID restrictions, and Brexit. Being a London Assembly member is brilliant, but it does bring its frustrations. Firstly, with a mayor who pretends he has no powers and spends most of his time passing the buck and not taking any responsibility. And also with a government who doesn't seem to understand that helping the rest of the country doesn't mean you need to do down London. That's why I've been pushing the mayor to set up a London apprenticeship hub for young people and employers to find work placements, for him to act on the recommendations of the Social Mobility Foundation and the CBI to set up a disability employment task force, and to keep London at the heart of Europe, supporting our EU citizens here. That's why I support the calls on the government to give proper financial support to small businesses and those who have been excluded, to prioritise green jobs at every stage of the recovery, and to recognise and tackle the deep-rooted inequalities in our employment market. I do hope this motion is going to be passed today, but I am really impressed with the amendment as well as a local councillor, and that it will give us even more impetus to keep fighting for small businesses and jobs.
Thank you, Hina. Can I ask Ian Solomon to stand by? Can I ask Bridget Smith to stand by, and I call Ian Solomon from South Cambridgeshire to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this motion and the commitment that the party is showing to small businesses by placing them at the heart of the recovery in this policy. Now, I've spent most of my working life working for small businesses, and it's been great. I don't claim that my experience is universal, but certainly the connection that you feel to all parts of a small business that you work in is, for me at least, really powerful. I'm probably biased. I grew up with my father running a small family business, and I'm incredibly proud of what he achieved in growing that company through the staff he employed, the technology and machinery he invested in, and the quality of service and end product that he was providing. It wasn't all plain sailing, what family business ever is. And seeing those struggles up close is actually one of the reasons why I haven't followed in his footsteps into that business. It does bring me to an aspect of the motion that the motion doesn't pick up on, but which I think is important to recognise. The vast majority of small businesses are also family businesses, and the struggles that they face quickly creep beyond the business environment itself and into the home. So when we support small businesses, as well as supporting a huge and significant vital part of the economy, we are also supporting families. And more than that, actually, we're also supporting women in business. In 2018, which was the most recent data I could find, over 80% of all small and medium family firms had at least one woman in a leadership role. And the figure was over 50% in non-family SMEs too. I welcome the amendment to the motion. As a district councillor, I have seen firsthand what our business support team in South Cambs has been able to achieve throughout the pandemic, but I know that my council leader, Bridget Smith, will tell you more about that next. Finally, conference, I would add that we do need to look beyond the measures in this motion as well and continue to look for opportunities to assist small benefit to the benefit of all. And on that theme, late payment continues to be one of the number one difficulties for small businesses. And despite the best efforts of the Small Business Commissioner, it continues to be a problem. I sadly speak from personal experience on this and chasing invoices, and I know my father would be disappointed with me if I didn't raise it. He has moaned to me enough about it. But that shouldn't distract from the excellent measures that are in this motion, and I urge you all to back both the motion and the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Can I ask Jeremy Purvis to stand by, and I call Bridget Smith, who, as you've already heard, is the Liberal Democrat leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council. And Bridget is going to submit on behalf of the ALDC.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, conference, and I'm very pleased to second the amendment. So one of the very first actions we took when we took over control of South Cambridgeshire District Council in 2018 was to establish an expert business support team in the council targeting SMEs, and over 95% of our businesses in our rural area are SMEs. Now, prior to that, a few years before, I'd conducted some research in my own ward about what the barriers were to growth for rural local SMEs. And worryingly, the planning system was seen to be a big problem. But additionally, businesses didn't know about each other. They didn't know where to go for information, advice and support. They weren't part of each other's supply chains. And they had very little awareness of grants or other organisations that were there to help them and access money for them. So our aim was to establish within the council a one-stop shop for business, and to give all businesses a single point of access to get to our own council services, but also to access other support from organisations like the Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses, who actually we've partnered with in order to develop this work. So what it meant was that when COVID hit, we were actually in a really good position to roll out the government support and give additional support to businesses, which they so badly needed. And a lot of that was obviously through our environmental health teams. And we were really successful at this because we knew who our businesses were, we knew where they were, and we knew what they did. And most importantly, they knew us and they trusted us to do what was in their best interest. So we got all the grants out, millions of pounds worth of them, really efficiently, avoiding any fraud. We visited hundreds of businesses to advise them on how to operate in a COVID-safe way. And our dedicated Reopening the High Street team have made multiple visits and are now about to launch a Visit South Cambridgeshire website to further stimulate particularly our local pubs, who are very often the very heart of our little communities, but also to support local food and leisure and heritage venues too. So please check that out. It should be live next week. And one of the greatest successes most recently has been in the dissemination of the growth grants. So this fund has been just under 1.4 million for us, and we've passed over already £1 million worth of that to 63 businesses across our district. And the grants have ranged from modest awards of £2,500 up to substantial ones of £50,000, and the average is about £20,000. So those larger sums have gone to businesses primarily in energy, IT, hotel and catering and manufacturing sectors. And smaller awards have focused more on public and professional, recreation, transport and retail. And because we know our businesses, we are better placed than anyone else to get money to them quickly and to get that money to the right places. And because our businesses trust us, we are best placed to work with our partners to support our businesses to grow, to start up, to diversify, and even to relocate. And we're very keen that we're running our own sort of inward investment programme in South Cambridgeshire. We don't want to be hemorrhaging businesses elsewhere, I'm afraid. And we did all this because we knew back in 2018 that it was the right thing to do. And we have been proven so right during the pandemic. And it's now down to governments, it's now government's turn to support us, to help us in local government to do even more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bridget. Can I ask Jeremy Purvis to submit on behalf of the whole motion? Lord Purvis is our spokesman in the House of Lords on international trade.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure with you today and to follow such excellent contributions in this short debate, and particularly to congratulate Paula and Quentin for their first-time speeches. It reminds me of something nearly 30 years ago when I was exactly in that position. I'm speaking to you from the rather beautiful Scottish borders where I live, and I had the pleasure of representing as a member of the Scottish Parliament. And the small businesses, as Hina Bukhari said in London, and it's wonderful to see the contribution that Hina is making in the London Assembly. the diversity in my area of agricultural, textile, tourism businesses, combined with the fact that we had local leaders, Liberal Democrat leaders, who were active in their community, who knew that businesses were the mainstream of that local community, as Bridget so very clearly outlined in her contribution. It's been, I think, a very good debate that's focused on the practical support that's needed. When I'm not in the Scottish Borders, I am part of the wider team that supports Sarah and the work in the House of Lords. And Sarah so very ably outlined the need for these measures in the debate today. And even yesterday in the House of Lords, I was challenging Lord Frost on 3 separate occasions about the increase of burdens and bureaucracy linked with Brexit on our business community, especially small businesses. And I've been working very hard with the team to try and put together the proper scrutiny and challenging on what has been nearly £6 billion extra of burdens on our small businesses for bureaucracy and regulations pre-pandemic. And therefore, the impact of the pandemic on top of that, of our small business community, has meant that we need the substantial responses which has been outlined, especially, as Ian had mentioned, on those women who are self-employed who disproportionately have been impacted, especially those with childcare responsibilities. And as Ian had so ably had said, that small businesses are also, in many respects, families. Paula had indicated the support that local authorities have been providing, not only to the small businesses, but also to families. And as Hina said in London, the diversity in the small businesses across the area has meant that the pressures needed bespoke responses for both families and for small businesses. And I think, thank you, Quinton, for the lone voice of opposition, but I think Imogen and Hina responded to your point. We are needing to transition out of pandemic to support businesses, but also transition to a different type of economy where business practices are different and the needs and the support of small businesses in particular are going to be required to be different. And in many respects, that transition has been the lifeline support that's still needed. And therefore, our motion squarely indicates that that lifeline support needs to be in place. But we're also looking to the future because we want to see an economy where it is thriving, where entrepreneurs feel liberated and small businesses are not burdened by Brexit bureaucracy, and we move towards supporting innovation. We recognise, as Ian had said, that for many small businesses, they're also families, and the enormous pressures that they've faced with increased debt, with increased pressures because of the pandemic. And therefore, part of our response has been focusing on family support. So our package is what government should be doing for finance, for investment support, shoring up support for families, and to reassure those from local government point of view, absolutely maintaining that support for our local leaders so they can do what is best for their local communities and the businesses that they know so well. We want all of this to be a package going forward. It's the type of economy that we want. And for me, a Liberal Democrat economy is one where it is a small business economy. And that is why I hope that this motion will be supported here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. We now move to 2 votes, one on the amendment and then one on the motion with or without the amendment, depending on the first vote. So can I ask you to vote on the amendment in the name of ALDC? Thank you very much. That amendment was very clearly carried. We're now going to move to a vote on the whole motion as amended. Thank you, Conference. F6 was clearly carried with 290 votes for and 5 against. We now come to the end of this session. The auditorium will be closing until the next debate, which is at 6:45. But please don't go away. There's consultation sessions, exhibition and fringe training events. All can be found on the conference directory, which is on the left-hand side of the hop-in page. So we'll see you later, 6:45, for F7, which is a debate on global taxation. Thank you. Can I also thank my aides, Chris Adams and Cara Jenkins.